Okay, so thanks for coming, everybody. My name is Mike Baker. My talk today is about human error and its impact on your Infosec program, or a tool basically I built to exploit that human error within your particular Infosec environment. So, who am I? Mike Baker, as I said, bike maker on Twitter. I'm on IRC, a bunch of other places, but I founded a company called BHAF Security out of Ann Arbor, Michigan. Currently functioning as the lead researcher in the organization, and also contribute to the AppSec program at Arbor Networks in Ann Arbor, which is a DDoS mitigation appliance and security company. Right, so to start, the leading causes of breaches. So there was some research done by a company called Baker Hostetler, based on all of their large corporate and even small enterprise information security engagements in 2015, that found that over 50% of the engagements that they had with customers and clients, I think it was something like 57% total of the breaches that they were called in on were attributable in some form or fashion to human error. It breaks down more specifically into these separate categories that are shown on this slide. 31% being phishing, hacking, malware, 24% of the incidents being specific employee action or a mistake. 17 were external theft, which is something like leaving your laptop in your unlocked car and someone comes along, takes it, and you had proprietary info on the laptop. 14% of the incidents were vendor related. 8 were actual internal employee theft, meaning somebody stole data they shouldn't have had access to, or expanded access where they shouldn't have. And 6% was lost or improper disposal of information, so things like decommissioning old hard drives without wiping them, things like that. Right. Even in all of these incidents, the underlying cause basically is Baker Hostetler was able to determine that it was all human error related when they really dug down into it to finding the root cause. So it was rarely even in these, so in all of the breaches that they looked at, it was rarely attributable to anything like a no-day being used against the company. It was rarely, specific to even to malware or phishing attacks. Though spear phishing campaigns, things like that, tended to be more frequent. Again, the underlying cause, even in those scenarios, is human error, right? So somebody is clicking a link they shouldn't have, putting their credentials in somewhere that they shouldn't be, whatever the case might be. So I started looking into this aspect of information security around 2013, and upon coming across this research that Baker Hostetler did and doing a little bit of my own research outside of that, I wanted to figure out a way that I could exploit that for my own gain. Bug bounties, I had done a little bit of work on via companies like HackerOne, which is basically like a hosted platform for companies to run a bug bounty program. I had worked through them a little bit, in the early stages, but hadn't really dug into getting involved in bug bounties. When I realized that this human error element is a large contributor to breaches, I thought to myself, well, how can I exploit the human error aspect of breaches to be a benefit to me as a bug bounty hunter, as a researcher, as a hacker? And so I realized that what I wanted to do was, find a way to exploit that, like I said. But how could I find a way to exploit that? looking at things like default configurations was one of the first things I put on my to-do list. Default configs, default passwords, exposed services where they shouldn't be. So things like listening on ports, on public-facing interfaces, things like that. On services such as Mongo, Apache, looking for exposed SVN, Git servers where they shouldn't be. These were all things that were kind of flying through my head, trying to figure out the best approach for this. So what did I do? I built a project called Heap. So what Heap is a front end and a back end that tie together to do some fun stuff. So Heap basically works like this. You go to the web interface here. You tell it what you want to look at. So the way I've been using it most prevalently is giving it a CIDR block. Right. So CIDR, for those that aren't familiar, is like a 10.10.0.0/16, for example, which is basically a subnet. A subnet definition. So you can give it a CIDR, you can give it a specific host name if you just want to look at one host, or you can give it a range of IP addresses individually. And what this does is it plugs it into our monitoring interface, stores that host information in my scanning database, and then kicks off a backend instance for that particular that host if it's an individual host, or it spawns off threads if it's a CIDR or multiple hosts. And what I do is on the back end, there's some scanning engine functionality built in using mass scan as a back end. It goes out and it starts probing these, either the host or the full block of IPs that you've configured that you want to monitor or scan against, and it builds a snapshot in time representation of what services are publicly available on that block at that particular point in time. I started off, when I did this, looking for specific things. I was looking for MongoDB instances that were open and that did not require username or password. Looking for Apache servers or other web servers that were open indexed. So there was no like index.html. You go to it and you get a directory listing. I was looking for open FTP servers that did not require auth. I was looking for SVN or Git repos, again, that did not require auth. And I was looking for Redis instances that were, again, public-facing or within the configured range that did not require auth to view the entries within the Redis instance at that point. And so an instance gets spawned off, a scanning instance gets spawned off for each of those, and for each host, a new entry is created in the database in the targets table, and then scanning starts for each one of the individual hosts, and I get alerts that are generated. You get an email for any instances that are found that match any of the configured human error element jackpots that are found. So in this instance, there was an open Apache instance, or excuse me, an open MongoDB server that was found and had no auth required. And you can see, so it gives me basically the host, the location, what the actual vulnerable instance was, server type, and if it was replicated locally on my scanning box storage system, the local path on my system. So for any open Mongo instances or open Redis instances or Apache, etc., anything that it found, basically, I configured to replicate all of the findings locally, so it could reference back for bug reporting purposes. So this, when I first started doing this, I focused very specifically on a small number of targets, that I chose just kind of randomly from the hosts and the companies that were within a very small list of companies that ran their own individual bug bounty programs, not necessarily a part of HackerOne or the other bug bounty platforms that are out there, and immediately saw a large number of results. I think in the first week of scanning and targeting, I had something like 157,000 results in the target tables over just four companies, and I think the actual address space that worked out to was something like a /24, which is crazy if you think about it. So, right. So, some of the notable findings that I was able to come across here. Oops, excuse me. The first one that I found that made me kind of go, "Oh my God, what have I done?" is I came across a open Mongo instance that was in AIDE Cloud's address space. AIDE Cloud is part of Alibaba, and it's basically Alibaba's EC2 alternative, or their answer to EC2 for Amazon's cloud platform. But so in that Mongo instance, when I took a look at it, what it consisted of was 4 or 5 fields, and they consist of things like public key, private key, and balance. And I thought, okay, well, what could this be? Looking at it, I'm a big fan of Bitcoin. I've used Bitcoin for I think I started in late 2010, so when I got involved. So big fan. Immediately recognized that some of these addresses looked like Bitcoin addresses. So started plugging in some of the addresses into a wallet balance checker, and realized that the balance that was being shown in relation to the public and private keys was representative of the actual balance on the Bitcoin blockchain for that particular address. Attempted to import one of those keys that had a balance locally using the private key that was listed, and it worked. So overall, when I put these numbers together, I had, let's see, 241,559 total Bitcoin that were at my disposal with no encrypted key for the private key, which means it was all public. I could import every one of those addresses to my own control locally, and I would own those Bitcoin, which is a massive, massive percentage of the actual Bitcoin in circulation for a single entity to hold. That scared me, because if I found this, there's a possibility other people could have found this. And this was, when I found this particular instance, it was late 2013, early 2014. So it was kind of right during when Shodan put out their Open Mongo report, which was something like 49,000 instances, I think they noted when they put that report out in late 2013. So I reported this to that company. It was a Bitcoin exchange out of a particular Asian country. So I reported it to them. I didn't take the Bitcoin and go buy an island somewhere, which I strongly considered for a long period of time. But I reported it to them. They were extremely thankful, as you can imagine. That would have definitely destroyed them and a lot of people's finances, I think. Anyway, so they were able to lock down their Mongo instance. What they had done is installed Mongo on their production server, which had a internet-facing interface and a LAN-facing interface. And when you do like apt install Mongo DB, for example, or Mongo server, by default, that's going to bind to 0000, which is going to bind to all available interfaces on your server, right? And that's what they had done. They had basically just app install Mongo and started using that for their backup of their active customer key store. So for all of the customers, all of the addresses that were generated in their system for them to use, as well as their cold storage wallets were backed up to this location as well. So, right. So that human error again, right? Whoever the sysadmin was that was responsible for setting that up, as I've done, and I'm sure anybody else who's done any package management on any Linux or Unix systems has done in the past, you just install the package and assume everything's okay sometimes without verifying what the default config is actually doing in this case. So I was able to help them lock that down and make sure that they didn't lose those keys. Thankfully, I worked with these guys for a while and wound up with a contract for active monitoring of their infrastructure as a result of reporting this to them. There was never any evidence of anybody else having discovered this information, at least for the 2 years following up until early last year, while I was still doing monitoring for them. None of the keys that were exposed in the instance ever experienced any theft or loss of value. So lucky for them, I was the only one that found it, it seems. I did get a bounty out of that. They paid me 25 Bitcoin as a thank you, which was nice. Yeah, so that was one of the more extreme findings. Newstar, they do a lot of DNS and threat monitoring and things like that. I found a couple of instances within Newstar. One of the instances I found seemed to be one of their QA or testing instances that was tied to an EC2 server. In that EC2 server, in that particular Mongo instance, they had backups of all of their QA employees' SSH keys, private and public, non-encrypted. So there's no passkey on them, which gave me access to their entire infrastructure via the EC2 server. So I could use the employees' SSH keys to SSH to the EC2 box that was exposed. And then from there, I could hop back to their infrastructure via the tunnel that they had set up to Amazon. This was an improper ACL configuration in their Amazon instance. Again, human error. Somebody put a 0 where a 1 was supposed to go, and as a result, opened up their QA instance to the entire world. And one of my other favorites was, there's a Mexican oil field monitoring company that in their platform, in the actual oil mining rig platform, they had a SIM or a 2G cellular connection. So all of the SIMs and all of the IMEIs for all of the devices that were out in the field connecting via 2G were logged and available in this public-facing Mongo instance, 50 gigabytes worth. So in theory, that's 50 gigabytes worth of cell account information I or anybody could have snagged up and cloned off onto another device. It was just 2G, and began using free cellular for life, basically, at that point, if I wanted to. So both Newstar and this Mexican oil field company were appreciative as well. They both paid me a finder's fee. Neither one had existing bug bounty programs, but what I've found is that even if a company doesn't have a program, if I come to them with a large enough find, or such as these, they're more than happy to pay me a thank you very much fee, just for not exposing it publicly at the time, and not not keeping it for my own use. So there's tons of other instances I could think of. Since we're on Marshall University's campus here, I did find several open, not Mongo instances, but there were a couple of Redis instances and some a ton of open-indexed Apache servers that I found that had sensitive information on it in Marshall, which were reported and fixed. This was in 2015 that they were reported. But again, they contain things like SSL, public, private keys for web servers. There were some user credentials. There were some SSH keys again. There were several source code repositories, again with user credentials exposed. There were more than one instance I found local and remote file inclusion vulnerabilities, and several OpenFTP servers that were misconfigured. So it's not, having an FTP server that has anonymous access enabled is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's all in how it's been configured to run, right? So if you have a misconfiguration, the base configuration of that FTP server that you've allowed anonymous access to, and maybe you have ACLs that aren't correct on that server as well, you're going to run into trouble where people have access to information they shouldn't have access to as a result of that human error in configuration. Perfect example of that is there's a particular NASA-related entity that I got an alert for from my from Project Heap that said, hey, I found this open FTP server, and it seemed to have 4 or 5 different NASs attached to it, and it looks like there's a lot of data exposed. Go check this out. So I logged into it, and it turns out it was a JPL system, and the system was configured with anonymous FTP access, but it was configured to have a base root of /. So it's a Windows system, and on a Windows system with this particular FTP server that was running, if you put / as the file system root, that gives you access as though you're looking at my computer when you're into the system, or when you actually log into the FTP. So you can go to any of the configured disks on the system. So because they had the anonymous account created and they didn't specify that it should be locked down to a specific guest or anonymous path on the system, it also gave it access to the / my computer view. And so what that did is it exposed some very, very sensitive NAS servers within JPL. JPL itself is not supposed to be exposed on the internet anywhere. So the fact that the FTP server was open was a problem in and of itself, but the misconfiguration of the anonymous access was an even larger concern for them at that point, because it meant anybody within the organization that had access internally, even if the external-facing situation is ignored, anybody could have connected to that, even if they didn't have specific rights or need to know for what was on these NAS servers. They could have accessed it anonymously through the FTP and accessed that information, or destroyed it, because it had read-write access, actually. So, thankfully, I have contact with .gov that I was able to report that to and get that fixed, which is a good thing. So, one of the more funny findings was there was an Arby and Burger King point-of-sale system that was logging to a Mongo instance in EC2. It seemed to be located in Central America somewhere. I wasn't able to find out who specifically owned the systems, unfortunately, so I couldn't get that one fixed. I reported it to EC2 though, to Amazon, who would be aware of who the owner of the instance was in which this stuff was being dumped to, so they were able to get in touch with them and work backwards through them to figure out where it was coming from. To lock it down, shortly after reporting this one, it disappeared. So it seems like they did get it fixed, but that was kind of a funny one, looking at people's lunch orders and stuff as they rolled in. So one of the last findings I'll talk about is this one, which is from Google itself, actually. It was early last year, 2016, I realized I hadn't actually ever looked at targeting Google specifically. They do have their own independent bug bounty program. And so I decided, okay, they actually have a hosting platform set up with some dedicated space within their own address space for public hosting. So I was like, okay, so I set up to monitor their address space. And within a couple of hours of actually kicking off that instance, I got an alert for them, and I was like, oh, interesting. The address that it came back to was this 8.35.197.72 IP address. So if you whois a Google web server, you get back specific information on the owning AS that's dependent on whether or not it's a public-facing system or if it's an internally used system at Google for their corporate infrastructure or corporate purposes. And in this particular IP address, when I whoised it, it came back with the internal infrastructure use AS information, which made it seem like this is going to be a good one for me. So taking a look at the Mongo instance that I found here, the first thing that came that popped up immediately was there was an admin user that was configured, and there was an @google.com email address that was configured with a password that was not encrypted and not encoded. This was a simple string that was being used for the password, a plain text string. That was interesting to me. So I went to this particular. There's another IP address down here. In this Mongo instance was stored a host name of 74. Blah blah blah. This IP address, and this IP address, when I browsed to it, was a Google search appliance. And so I thought, oh, that's interesting. It had the admin and again plain text credentials here. So I tested that admin, then the credentials there, and it let me log into the admin user on this. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. So it's a Google internally owned Google system that they use for internal purposes, using these credentials, and they're valid. Okay, so I started looking through the configuration on this Google search appliance, and it turns out it was one of their demo appliances that they use when they're demoing for corporate or .gov customers. And some of the information that was in this Google search appliance was very, very sensitive. It was being actively used as a demo system for some defense contracting companies, which was scary looking at it. I got scared for a minute because I don't want knocks on the doors or any vans pulling up. And anytime you look at defense stuff, it gets scary. But so having seen that, I started poking around a little bit in the Google search appliance itself that I got logged into here, and was able to find a way to get into the actual shell, the system shell on the system, which isn't normally available, and basically a remote code execution bug that I found in the login page gave me access to the system itself, so I was able to pop a reverse shell back to myself, and then I started playing around on their system. And so they had this demo Google Search appliance. It was connected both to their Google corporate LAN and as well as the internet, obviously, for demo purposes. And so I was able to start spidering my way back through the Google corporate HQ network as a result of this configured admin password on the Google Search appliance. This password was one of their internally used system passwords for commonly used accounts. So it was a shared password, basically. They used it across all of the shared systems in most of their infrastructure. So I was able to start snaking through their internal AIDE infrastructure. So basically anything within Google I could have, I owned at that point. This one was a bad one. Again, Google was very appreciative for the report here. they paid very well for this bug, and we're very happy to receive it and fix it, which is always a good thing. So again, the common thread through all of these findings, right? Human error. It always comes down to human error. It's always going to come down to human error. Humans are the weakest link when it comes to information security. So how do we fix that? The best ways that I've found and been able to take away from the work I've done with Heap over the past couple of years is awareness and training is basically the best, your best defense. You have to train your users, your employees, anybody that's going to be accessing your systems. You have to let them know that while striding perfection, accidents do happen, and not to be afraid to call attention to accidents or situations in which they made a mistake have occurred. They shouldn't be afraid to tell you that as an information security professional. They should be able to come to you to tell you that, and not be scared to do that, right? Because you want them to admit to mistakes so that you can help them fix it, A, to cover your company's butt, but B, as a training potential for them also, right? To say, hey, this is what you did, this is what could have been done better, so that it doesn't happen in the future, or you can avoid this whole scenario down the road. So training. I try to approach any scenario I get brought to my attention, either via this project or in consulting with clients. Anytime anything's brought up, I always make a mental note and later a physical note to go back and look at it from a how can we learn from this perspective, which is the best approach. One of the other things, it's kind of attached to the training thing that I just mentioned, but specifically related to phishing, is you have to do simulation training, right? So you need to throughout the year, periodically, whether it's once a quarter, whatever is best for your organization, you have to implement a program in which you're testing your vulnerability to phishing attacks, spear phishing attacks specifically. So repeated exposure to unexpected scenarios makes unexpected expected. That's a complicated way to say it, but training to get better at recognizing potential threats is the best defense should an attack ever come your way or your organization's way. The other two key aspects that need to be addressed from looking at these things and reporting these and working with companies over the past couple of years is data loss prevention software, having some sort of monitoring in place for systems, for infrastructure, for user access. So those things need to be in place. You have to have something that's going to tell you, or at least aid your system admins, if you don't have a specific security program, to aid the admin level users in recognizing when access to information is being misused and or being granted where it shouldn't be. And that goes into the last bullet point also, which is ensuring that the appropriate access rights and privileges are in place across your organization. You need to check to make sure that users such as anonymous aren't configured to use an incorrect path or / on your FTP server if you have to have an anonymous user. You need to make sure that a user in accounting maybe doesn't need access to admin level access to your source code repo, things like that, right? Segregation as much as possible, and auditing of access rights and privileges across the organization are something that should be done regularly. I tend to recommend at least twice a year for auditing purposes there, but even if you do more, good. The more you check and confirm that users have the correct access, that access isn't being overprescribed, the better you're going to be in the end. Because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when someone gets access to your network that shouldn't have it. And if you have the appropriate access privilege restrictions in place, it's not going to be as devastating to you or your organization as if you don't have those things in place. So again, just a couple of closing points. Humans, we're the weakest link in security, and we always will be. You can't really get away from that, but again, training and awareness programs implemented in your organizations